Hello, and thank you for launching this web tutorial on preparing bulk fixed availability challenge and crowdsource data for the FCC's new Broadband Data Collection, or BDC. I'm Jean Cadieux, Chair of the FCC's Broadband Data Task Force. Over the past few months, the FCC has collected information from internet service providers across the country showing locations where they make broadband service available and at what speeds. Once maps rendering that data are made public later this month, the opportunity to challenge the data at particular locations will be available. This online tutorial is directed to state, local, and tribal governmental entities, broadband service providers, and other entities who may file bulk challenges to fixed availability data. This information will help them format their submissions and upload their data. The tutorial is part of a broader set of technical assistance materials that the FCC is making available to stakeholders who will contribute data and information into the BDC to help improve the accuracy of the FCC's National Broadband Map. You can find these additional resources by visiting www.fcc.gov/broadbanddata and clicking the Resources tab and Education heading. Thanks again for taking time to watch this webinar and for your effort to help us improve the maps. I'll turn it over to Karen Sprung, Counsel to the Task Force, to get us started.
As part of the FCC's new Broadband Data Collection, or BDC, service providers report where their service is available for each network technology, such as fiber, cable, or satellite, and then report the maximum advertised download and upload speeds associated with each technology. Based on the type of data the FCC is collecting, we want to note two key points up front about the process for challenging the data. First, the broadband data collection maps will depict broadband availability. Other data, such as network performance, affordability, or adoption, are not included in the new maps and not a part of this challenge process. Broadband service is considered available at a location if the provider has or previously had a connection and service to the location, or if the provider could initiate service through a routine installation within 10 business days of a request with no extraordinary charges or delays attributable to extending the provider's network. Second, in the initial version of the BDC maps, which will be available in mid-November, the provider's data will reflect the locations where the provider claims to make service available as of June 30th, 2022. Any information on where service was or was not available prior to June 30th, therefore, cannot be used as the basis for a challenge to the June 30th vintage of the availability data submitted by providers. Challenges to fixed availability data for an individual location will be accepted directly through the MAP interface. We encourage partners to provide education and support to consumers and constituents to enable them to participate in this process directly. For both individual and bulk availability challenges, providers will have an opportunity to review and either concede or resolve a challenge. The provider is expected to communicate and work directly with the challenger to resolve the challenges that it does not concede. If a provider concedes a challenge or fails to rebut it, the challenge services will no longer show as available for that location on the FCC's maps. If an entity believes a provider's claim regarding service availability is incorrect for multiple locations, then it can submit a bulk fixed challenge to that information via the BDC system. Regardless of the methodology used to generate a bulk challenge, each record in the challenge must have one of the following reasons and reason codes assigned. 1. Provider failure to schedule install within 10 days of request for service. Use this category challenge code when a consumer contacted the provider to request service, but the provider was unable to offer an installation date that was within 10 business days of the service request. 2. Provider failure to perform install within 10 days of request for service. Use this challenge code when a consumer contacted the provider and had an installation scheduled, but the provider did not perform the install on that date or within 10 business days of the initial service request. 3. Provider demand for connection charges that exceed its standard installation charge. Use this code when the provider demanded a fee amount to connect the location in excess of the provider's standard installation charge. 4. Provider denial of request for service. This code applies when a consumer contacted a provider to request service, but the provider denied the request. 5. Reported service type not offered. In this case, some type of service may be available at the location, but the reported technology, fiber, cable, or satellite, is incorrect. 6. Reported speed not available for purchase. Use this code when the speed tier reported is not offered for purchase at the location. Note that this is distinct from the speed being delivered not matching the marketed speed. In cases where you have data suggesting that the actual speed of a service received at a location does not match its advertised speed, you can submit that data to the FCC using the bulk crowdsource data submission process. 8. Signal not available. This applies only to satellite and fixed wireless services. This code can be used to indicate that a fixed wireless or satellite signal is not available. The signal may not be available at the challenged location, or the service could be oversubscribed in the area. 9. Provider demand for additional construction. Satellite or fixed wireless only. If a fixed wireless or satellite provider is requesting charges to construct a tower or other structure in order to install their equipment at the customer's location, use this code. This is distinct from reason 3, where a fixed wireline provider is requesting fees to extend their network in order to provide service. Once the maps are released, entities that wish to submit a bulk challenge can download the fixed broadband availability data via the Data Downloads page on the BDC broadband map. These data will include all of the locations with the associated FCC location IDs at which service providers report fixed service, including the technology and maximum advertised download and upload speeds of service. Using the publicly available data, a governmental or other entity can identify the locations where the entity has actual knowledge or has aggregated information from individuals that the provider has misreported its fixed service and assemble a bulk fixed challenge for submission into the BDC system. Files will be available by state, technology, and data as of date in a zip archive. The files will contain records of the locations from the broadband serviceable location fabric for which any fixed service provider reported broadband availability. The files are available for download in comma-separated value, CSV, format, and will include the following fields for each location: FRN, Provider ID, Brand Name, Location ID, Technology, Maxed Advertised Download Speed, Max Advertised Upload Speed, Low Latency, Business Residential Code, State Abbreviation, U.S. Census Bureau Block GeoID, and the H3 Level 8 hexagonal area in which the BSL is located. H3 is an open-source hexagonal hierarchical geospatial indexing system developed by Uber Technologies. Tribal and governmental entities and other third parties that are interested in submitting bulk availability challenges will likely find it helpful to have the fabric data for their area on hand as they review the availability data they receive. If an entity has not yet completed the licensing process for the fabric, we have a step-by-step guide available on fcc.gov/broadbanddata/fabric-help. The bulk fixed challenge process is designed so that challenges can be processed quickly and resolved by the challenger and the provider. Bulk fixed challengers can choose from 3 methodology options when submitting their data. 1. Knowledge of infrastructure. 2. Information collected from individual consumers. And 3. Other. If the bulk fixed challenge data is based on a methodology other than the first 2 options, then the filer should choose Other. The other category is intentionally broad to allow for other circumstances in which stakeholders can show lack of availability. There are lots of possibilities. For example, a government or nonprofit might gather provider marketing materials or other information that show the reported service is not in fact available at multiple locations. A governmental entity might also get access to information in the course of its own activities, conflicting in some way with a provider's availability data. The bulk fixed availability challenge data that must be submitted varies slightly based on the methodology used by the challenger to generate its data. Regardless of the methodology used, a separate challenge file will need to be uploaded for each provider being challenged. In all cases, the data must include the name and contact information of the challenger, the location ID for the location at which availability is disputed based on the broadband serviceable location fabric, the category of the challenge, and evidence to support the challenge. A knowledge of infrastructure challenge could be based on knowledge of where network facilities exist. This knowledge could be based, for example, on local building permit records, rights-of-way records, franchise agreements, or an on-the-ground examination of broadband infrastructure, including trenching activity, in a particular area. The filer will need to create a CSV file that includes a column for provider ID, brand name, technology type code, for example, code 50 for fiber to the premises, location ID from the FCC broadband map, data vintage, the category code associated with the reason for the challenges, request date, and a request method code. There is also an optional field for a narrative description of the evidence being provided. We expect many knowledge of infrastructure challenges to tie to reason codes 5 or 6. Provider does not offer the technology at this location, and provider does not offer the maximum reported at this location, respectively. In those cases, the request date and request method code fields must be left null. Filers submitting a bulk challenge based on this methodology must upload a separate file that provides evidence to support the fixed availability challenge. At least one evidence file must be submitted for each bulk fixed challenge file. The accepted file formats for the evidence file are doc, docx, PDF, JPEG, and PNG. Effectively participating using this methodology will require localized knowledge about the services available at a location. States may consider working with local governments to help review and verify data as part of their challenge efforts. The second methodology option is based on aggregated information collected from individual consumers about the broadband services that are available or not available to them. If a bulk fixed challenge submission is based on either the second methodology, information collected from individual consumers, or another methodology, then the filer will need to upload a CSV file that includes the following information for each location being challenged: contact name, email and phone number for an individual associated with the challenge at that location, provider ID, brand name, technology type code, location ID from the FCC broadband map, data vintage, the category code for the challenges, request date, and a request method code. There is also a required field for a narrative description of the evidence in support of the challenge. Filers submitting a bulk challenge based on methodology codes 2 or 3 have the option to upload a separate file or files that provides evidence to support the fixed availability challenge. The accepted file formats for the evidence file are doc, docx, PDF, JPEG, and PNG. States may survey consumers and constituents or develop an online portal or app to collect this information. They will need to ensure that they collect the required data in the required format so that it will be accepted by the BDC system. The data must be collected after the June 30th as-of date for provider availability. information on addresses where service is lacking will need to be conformed to the unique location identifiers, or location IDs, for each location as listed in the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric data. Each location will need to have a category code associated with the reason for the challenge. In addition, someone at the state will need to certify that the data are correct, so you need to make sure that you have confidence in the data and aren't simply passing along an unsubstantiated claim. If the bulk challenger does not already have an FCC username and password and an FCC registration number, or FRN, they first need to obtain one in CORS, the Commission Registration System. When creating your FRN, you must select the entity type that matches your government type. For example, federal, state or local, or tribal. Once you have obtained an FCC username and password, log into the BDC system at bdc.fcc.gov using those credentials. After logging in, you should see any FRNs associated with your username. Click on the FRN for the entity that is seeking access to the Fabric dataset. That will take you to the Entity Information page in the BDC system. Enter the required information. Note that the entity type selected on that page must match the entity type selected when registering the FRN in CORS Step 1. The particular governmental entity type selected in the BDC system must also match the governmental entity type selected in CORS. Select only the bulk crowdsourced/challenge data option when completing the page. Filers that are only interested in participating in the challenge process should not select the broadband availability data option. Once they have updated their entity information page, they will have the ability to select a file, bulk fixed availability challenge, in the BDC system. Select from the drop-down menu the methodology used to gather the information. Enter a narrative explanation of the methodology and source of the information contained within the bulk fixed challenge data. Provide contact information for the challenger for filers that select the Knowledge of Infrastructure methodology. Upload the CSV file and any supporting evidence files. Crowdsourcing. In addition to the challenge process, another opportunity for broader participation is through the submission of crowdsourced data. The challenge process provides a structured forum to present data disputing the accuracy of provider data, with prescribed timeframes and burdens of proof. The crowdsourced process is a less formal, more expansive opportunity to submit input in response to provider data to ensure that we can collect additional data that will help us to validate the data we collect. For example, patterns evidenced by crowdsourced data could help us to identify geographic areas or filer data that warrants further investigation or follow-up, such as through informal engagement with providers or, where appropriate, audits and enforcement actions. Crowdsourced data differs from the challenge data in several ways. First, challenges will always result in a resolution of some type, whether through providers conceding, agreement between a challenger and a provider, or a determination by the FCC. We will look at crowdsourced submissions, and although they will not necessarily result in a specific outcome, we expect they will impact the public data indirectly by prompting us to review data further and to conduct investigations that will lead to corrections in the data. Second, while the data will be shared with the relevant provider, unlike a challenge, the provider will not be required to respond to the crowdsourced information. Third, filers of bulk crowdsourced data can provide information on locations where the performance of fixed broadband service does not match its advertised speed. Fourth, providing evidence to support the circumstances claimed in crowdsourced data is optional. Finally, filers of crowdsourced data do not need to certify that they own or reside at the location or are otherwise authorized to request broadband service there, which individual filers of challenge data are required to do. Similar to the bulk challenge submission process, entities will need to have FRN and CORS login and will begin the process by completing their entity ID page in the BDC system. All entities submitting bulk fixed availability crowdsource information must first enter information in a web form in the BDC system about the methodology used to collect the bulk crowdsource information. Crowdsource filers must also choose from the same 3 methodologies as fixed availability challenge filers. 1. Knowledge of infrastructure. 2. Information collected from individual consumers. And 3. Other. The information that is required for each type of crowdsource submission largely aligns with the requirements for challenge submissions using the same methodology. The key differences are the greater scope of information that can be submitted in support of a crowdsource submission and the ability for individuals to submit data for locations where they do not reside or otherwise have the authorization to request service. For more information, visit fcc.gov/broadbanddata.